Hello and welcome to Elvenhome, and to this edition which has taken 3 weeks to produce, and so therefore, for a reason that I'll explain a bit later in the video, is a video of two halves. The first half is me responding to all the many wonderful comments and useful comments that I had after my last video, and introducing some new locomotives that joined the fleet, one of them rather unexpectedly, over the last couple of weeks. Then there's a running session, and that's the end of part one. And then in part two, well, I'll explain what's in part two when I get to it. So let's go back to me now. About a week ago, it was just over a week ago, when I was putting together what I thought was going to be the video that was going to come out last Friday. Before I go any further, the first thing I have to do is just say thank you to everybody for the tremendous amount of comments that I got back at the end of after the last video. Just loads of really helpful thoughts about what I might do in this area. Now, what you're looking at the moment is a photograph that I took of the track layout as it actually is. And shortly, I will fade that down so that you can see what I'm intending to do by way of change. Lots of really useful things, ideas of moving the gasworks across the other side of whatever the water feature might be. Quite a lot of people thought that actually a canal might be better than a river, and I think that's probably where my thoughts are going. Well, it is where my thoughts are going, as I shall tell you shortly. Some really interesting views about how the hillside might be on a slope. But the main thing I think that I took was, one, my instincts were right that actually something quite drastic had to change here because it wasn't sort of working. The other thing, which I came to only a few days ago, was I was beginning to overthink this. This is a model railway layout. It is not a scale model of a real place because I don't have the space to do that, and that therefore worrying about landforms and topography and how would nature have created this thing is going a bit far, which is where I was beginning to go to, as some of you will know from the responses that I gave to your comments. What I'm going to do, by way is thank you, is I'm going to put on a scroll at some point around here the names of all those that were kind enough to give me comments, by way of a thank you, rather than reading them all out now, because there were a good number of them. But really thank you to everybody for taking that time and responding to me. So where has that left me? Well, it was actually a very interesting exercise having a look at the track as it actually is and what I believed to be curves of particular size, which turns out that I couldn't have been more wrong, that they were not of that particular size. That the curve, particularly if you look at the picture now, as it comes along the top edge, the furthest edge from where you're looking, the curve is quite shallow, but it then tightens and continues to tighten to a very tight curve before it swings into then swing the other way and come over the viaduct. And as you'll see shortly, my 9F arrived this week, and I was expecting it to grumble going over the viaduct and hitting the wall of the viaduct on the outer edge. In fact, it sailed over that, but it did not like the inner curve one little bit. It's supposed to be able to do first radius curves, the DAPL 9F, but I know that curve is not as tight as first radius, but it wasn't a happy bunny going round it. So it's route restricted to only travel in one direction at the moment. But it did highlight the fact that things have got to change. So what is going to change? Here you can see the track plan, and you'll see that it looks very similar, but it's not the same. When I've brought this up, I'll do it so you can just about see the existing track plan underneath, because the curve now is much smoother. It's a consistent 12.5 inch inside curve on the left hand side, and the outer one is 14, because that 1.5 inch difference in radius means that the overhang of the coaches, as they take the curve, there will be no connecting as they go round the curve, and it means that the curve, as you can see, coming off the main baseboard and taking to the left, is now much smoother, a more gentle curve altogether. And I think what I am going to do is I am going to put a canal in rather than a river, and the canal is going to have a space for the gasworks, which is going to move the other side of the river, so sit below High Elven, and so that it can be coaled from the canal, or at least was originally coaled from the canal. That does mean I'll have to put a road in, but the beauty of canals is that you don't need much clearance under the bridges that you build for the canals, because obviously all you need is the height of a person, really, or a horse, to be able to get underneath them. So the canal is going to move, the gasworks is going to move over to the other side. Not yet made my mind up what I'm going to use the space that will be reclaimed as land, because I will lift the land level on the right hand side to be common with the rest of that area. So the canal was driven through the land, and I'll sort the landscape out on the left hand side going up to High Elven once I think a bit further. But because I spent ages and ages worrying about this and worrying about that, and I'm not going to, because I need to get on and actually do some modelling. Now what you'll be seeing is the full plan without the existing track shining through, and this is what I will now set about doing. The viaduct is going to come in about here. I'm going to have the viaduct swinging through here, and the canal will come out through here and then turn. There'll be an area to allow it to turn. I may, we'll see, put a lock in here for the canal to turn out into what could have been a river, possibly. I don't know. I've got to get that round my head. A bit like those of you that have been that are in Scotland, if you've ever been to the Kelpies, where the Union Canal, I think, lets out into the River Forth. The arrangement there is what's sitting in my head, whether I can do something down in this area. But if not, the canal can come out through here and then continue on and disappear in a tunnel. Pete Townsend, I think, suggested that to me, and I thought that was an excellent idea, because there is the issue of, well, how do you get the water feature, whatever you've got, off your layout? And if there's a river here, where's it coming from? So I think it's more likely that will be an area for the boats to turn here, a winding hole that would allow the boats, if necessary, to turn completely around, but also to be able to make the 90 degree turn and then go off in this direction and disappear into a tunnel cut into the rock, which will come down from High Elven. So that's what's in my mind. I think it probably means the thing that I'm havering about is, do I just lift the track and do all that, or do I try and build most stuff around it and do the track work right at the end? Because it's a shame to essentially be unable to run the trains. That I've yet to make my mind up. I think I know that the only way to do this is to lift the track, put all the landscaping in as it needs to be for the future, build the new viaduct, and then restore running all the way around the layout. But I'm still wrestling with myself for that. So that's where I've got to after all the really excellent suggestions and help that I've had back. High Elven is going to be the board as cut back, I think. I'm pretty certain about that. Mind you, I've been certain about other things. I think I'll live with that because it would just be part of what is obviously a village that's sitting up on the hill that goes back beyond the edges of this layout. So after all that waffle, let's have a look at some trains and two new locomotives which joined the fleet in the last week. Well, this starts part 2 of the video that I mentioned in the introduction. And the reason for part 2 is that I wasn't able to complete all the filming that I wanted to do in time to put the video up last week, which is when it was due. Various things got in the way. So in the end, I decided that I would wait a week and in the intervening weeks start work on building the new viaduct, or at least designing the new viaduct, because although I know from the plan roughly where the viaduct will be, I hadn't got in my mind just how big it might be. And what you see in front of you is the first iteration of the plan for the deck of the viaduct, because obviously once I've settled that, everything else will follow. And also the woodworking compasses that I bought. This is a mighty pair of compasses, these things, just in case you thought it was the land of the giants. They really are that big. They can do up to a 15-inch radius circle, which is more than enough for me. I think they can go a little bit more. They may be able to go up to 20 inches, which is a pretty big circle. But we are going to be dealing with quite big circles because the inner radius of the track is 12.5 inches and the outer radius is 14 inches. That of course is measured to the centre of the track. Therefore the bridge needs to be wider than that, and I know now that a 2.5 inch deck isn't wide enough, and I'm using a wider radius anyway here, so the deck is going to be 3 inches wide. To give enough space from where I think the outer line and the inner line of the two lines will be, if you see what I mean, I want to give a good clear 1/4 of an inch, which is more than enough to allow everything to pass, and there's plenty of space between the two running lines there'll be no coming together of coaches as trains pass. So the reason this is the first iteration is that although I'm reasonably confident this is accurate, what I very quickly engaged with was that this piece of paper isn't big enough for the viaduct as I think it's eventually going to be, and therefore on order is a pad of A2 graph paper, and A2 is pretty roughly the size of this. This is slightly bigger, the cutting mat, than A2, but it's very nearly the size. And so once that comes, I will redraw all these lines. But to tell you what's going on, the first lines that I put in were the center lines of what will be the two curves. So the curve here is at 12 inches radius, and the curve there is at 14 inches. So that's where the two tracks swing round. And that's the center lines, remember. So the track, I've got a piece of track here, which I've got, this is at 12 inches rather than 12.5. So that track will sit there. Plenty of room between the two, with this one sitting here. So the two tracks will come a bit closer to each other. Then I've got the 3/4 of an inch either side of the center line, so going out to there and coming into here, and that sets the inner and outer radius of the viaduct. What I then was trying to work out was how wide an angle do I want the viaduct to go through. The existing viaduct goes through 90 degrees, and this is all necessary to know, because without that you cannot calculate the length of the inner radius of the viaduct and the length of the outer one. And at some point I'm going to cut the facings to allow the portals to go straight through. They will go with the walls parallel to each other, and if you go back to one of my early videos when I showed you how I built the existing viaduct, it's a fairly simple task to calculate what those distances are, but you need to know what is the radius of the circle of the curve and what is the angle through which the curve moves, because what we have here is an arc of a circle. The reason I stick to 90 is that it's essentially a percentage. So it's 90 degrees of 360 degrees, which very handily is 1/4 of, and then the radius. So the distance along here is of pi times twice the radius multiplied by 1/4, because 2 pi r gives you the circumference of a circle, and I'm only dealing with 1/4 of it. And then you do the same for that side, and it gives you the lengths. From that, I then put together this piece of paper, which is exactly the right length for 11 3/4 inch radius curve, which I think is about 14.4 inches. And if I very roughly put it here, where are we going? We're going from there to there. You'll see that it does indeed come between these two lines here. Now these two lines here take it through 60 degrees, and I don't think that's big enough. I think it does need to go through 90, and if I'm going to take it through 90 degrees, this piece of paper ain't big enough. So that's why I've got the bigger pad coming. And also I want to have a piece of paper big enough that I can keep the compasses on the same sheet. So I'll have a big sheet here. Like the compass can sit right at the bottom here. You can't see because it's below the camera. And I can swing through 90 degrees because I've already measured it and made sure I can, and draw in the deck. And then cut the pieces of paper that will give me the length of the inner and outer arc. I will take you through the process of why I need to make those pieces of paper and how I work out where the portals will be on the inner arc first, and that will then tell me where they're going to be on the outer arc and how I make all that work. But I thought I would show you this at this point and try and show you where the viaduct is going to be on the revised track plan. So if I just take you up to the screen, now what I'm hoping you can see, I will just zoom in a little if you'll excuse me. There we go. That's the revised track plan, or the revised curve at the with the softer curves coming round, and that is where the viaduct is going to be. So it's almost in the same place, but not quite, because at the moment it sits here, parallel here, and runs through 90 degrees to about here. So it's moved around a bit and it's going to be bigger. Quite a bit bigger, I think, certainly on the outer edge. So I've got to make up my mind how many portals I want to put in. The current one has 4. I think there will be room for 5 on this one. But again, I need to work all this out because that will determine whereabouts through here the canal is going to come that will service this area. So much turns on the viaduct and where the viaduct is, that's got to be built before I start doing any major reorganisation of track and other things. And my light has just died, but never mind. So that's just brought you up to date what I've been working on and cudgelling my mind with all the figures. And we'll just go back onto the layout to bring this edition, a 3-week edition, to a close. So with that brings this edition of Elvenhome to a close. As I said, I'm so grateful for all the comments, and it's been really quite good to start work again on working out the design for the new viaduct, more of which in the next edition, and also beginning to think how the canal is going to come through pretty much where the Brandywine River was originally going to go. And I won't start work on dismantling all that's in and around the gasworks area until I've got the new viaduct built. So I hope when you come back in a couple of weeks' time that you'll have more to see on that. In the next edition I will showcase 2 more to watch channels. I know both of the channels that I showcased last time round gain more subscribers, so thank you for all of you going off and looking at that, and I'm sure you're enjoying watching those channels along with all the others that you no doubt watch. If you've got any comments, then please do let me have them. You've seen how helpful they are to me, and I'm really so grateful for anyone that takes the time to give me comments. But as this 9F negotiates the bend that I thought it wouldn't negotiate, that's it for this weekend. So I'll see you in a couple of weeks' time. So with that, that's bye-bye from me. Bye-bye.